Mammatus clouds are distinctive pouch-like formations that hang from the underside of a larger storm cloud, most often the anvil of a thunderstorm. They form differently than most clouds. Instead of rising air, mammatus develop from sinking air. Cold, moisture-laden air in the upper part of a storm becomes heavier and sinks into warmer, drier air below. This process creates these smooth, rounded pouches that give mammatus their unique appearances. These clouds are mostly made of ice crystals, sometimes mixed with liquid water, which helps them remain visible longer. They often appear as clusters of rounded lobes that resemble cotton balls, popcorn, or a textured ceiling. Individual pockets of clouds typically last about 10 minutes. Entire fields of mammatus can persist from several minutes to a few hours depending on the environment. While they can look ominous, mammatus clouds themselves are not responsible and are not dangerous and do not produce tornadoes. However, they signal strong instability, turbulence, and powerful air motions within a nearby storm. Pilots are trained to avoid flying near mammatus because of wind shear and rough air. They're most commonly seen just before, during, or after the strongest part of a storm has passed. So remember, mammatus clouds are a visual clue that a powerful storm is nearby, even if the worst weather has yet to come or already moved through.